What's going on, everybody? Today we are going to talk about a story that has been floating around quietly. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the first time you're actually hearing about this story. And I have to give a shout out to Jew Almighty because his channel was the first person I saw actually talk about this, and I had to go look it up. And then when I did, only a couple of articles, literally maybe no more than 3 articles, were posted up talking about this story, and it just happened on December the 1st, and I'm recording this on December the 2nd. So when I say floating around too quietly, I mean just that, probably barely even a whisper, considering how big of a deal it was supposed to be. I'm talking about the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE, the agency that Trump administration created in early 2025 to streamline the federal government and cut bureaucracy, modernize operation, and quote unquote drain the swamp. But as of late 2025, it's reports that have come out that have confirmed one thing: that DOGE is done, finished, disbanded, canceled, terminated, shut down, any other words that can describe this. And depending on who you ask, it either faded away or it never fully existed in the first place. So today we're going to break down what DOGE was supposed to be, why it collapsed, what happened internally, and what its quiet but slow death tells us about the federal government politics, power dynamics, and the reality of sweeping reform promises. The first thing I want to go over with this is what DOGE actually is, because to understand why the end of DOGE is so bizarre, you first need to know how it even came into existence. So in January of 2025, immediately after taking office, Trump signed an executive order creating the Department of Government Efficiency, and the vision was bold: a rapid sweeping overhaul of federal operations. The department was tasked with these things: cutting government waste, modernizing outdated systems, consolidating overlapping agencies, reducing bureaucracy, streamlining how federal departments communicate, and saving the US billions of dollars by restructuring inefficiencies. Trump supporters compared it to a massive corporate audit, something you'd see in maybe Silicon Valley or Wall Street. Critics called it unrealistic or even chaotic from day one. But regardless of where you stood politically, DOGE was presented as one of the administration's flagship projects. Adding fuel to the attention was the involvement or perceived involvement of people like Elon Musk, who was said to have informal advisory influence. The branding, the social media discourse, and the promise of efficiency made DOGE trend constantly during its rollout. The messaging was loud, the mission was huge, but the execution was very shaky. One of the biggest misunderstandings about DOGE is that people assumed it was operating at the scale of a full cabinet level department with big buildings, giant budgets, and thousands of employees. In reality, DOGE was more of an oversight unit, a team combining policies, researchers, administrative experts, IT consultants, and government analysts. Their job was to locate inefficiencies, propose reorganizational solutions, and monitor the execution of those solutions across the federal government. Some of the early DOGE initiatives reportedly included reviewing outdated IT systems in federal agencies, mapping overlapping responsibilities between departments, proposing ways to streamline procurement, auditing redundant office structures, and exploring whether entire offices could be merged or eliminated. But here's the plot twist: DOGE had no real enforcement power. It could suggest, but it could not mandate. It could study, but it could not restructure. It could recommend, but it could not implement. So when you combine that with the internal resistance, because no federal department likes to be told it's inefficient, DOGE's recommendations began to pile up without being formally executed, and that's where the cracks began to show. Fast forward to the second half of the year 2025, journalists began to notice that DOGE had gone radio silent. They had no press briefings, they had no updates, they had no releases, and no policy impact. Just nothing. Then in late November 2025, the story broke wide open. Federal officials confirmed that DOGE had been quietly dissolved months before its official mandate was set to expire. And for those of y'all who don't know, the mandate was set to expire somewhere in like mid 2026. And they said that it dissolved months before. So the story itself is just now coming out, but they've been dissolved for maybe at least 2 months. That's crazy. According to reports from Reuters, The Guardian, and several U.S. outlets, many DOGE staff were reassigned to the Office of Personnel Management, also known as OPM. The department no longer exists in any functional capacity. Its official charter was not renewed, and there was no major public announcement. It just vanished into thin air. This wasn't a scandalous shutdown. It wasn't a dramatic firing. It wasn't even a political battle in Congress. It was a slow fade out and then just simply a whisper. A federal project that started with noise and ended with silence. So I know one of the biggest questions people are asking by now, those who give a damn, is why did DOGE fail? Why did it happen? Well, there are a few reasons. The first one is, and I actually mentioned it before this part, they had no legal power. DOGE couldn't force agencies to change. Using an advisory body to reform the entire government is like using a suggestion box to run a corporation. They had interagency resistance. Departments started to see DOGE as a threat, and because no one enjoys being audited or told that they're redundant, that's why this happened. It was organizational confusion, a lot of it. DOGE's mission was massive, but its structure was too vague. Many different agencies interpreted it differently, and some didn't know who to report to, and others simply ignore it. There were resource limitations. Despite its big branding, DOGE didn't have the staffing or the budget of a true department. It was more like a task force with a department-sized PR campaign. It had internal political tension. Some reports went out and suggested friction between DOGE leadership and other federal bodies. So when you combine politics, bureaucracy, and efficiency mandates, that's when you start to get a lot of tension and conflict. It had unrealistic timelines. Reforming the government, the federal government that is, in 12 to 18 months is just simply not realistic. And it had lack of measurable output. By late of 2025, sources started to claim that few major wins could be demonstrated publicly, and all of this led to shrinking internal support, dwindling influence, and eventually the decision to fold DOGE into pre-existing structures rather than keep it operating independently. Another question people will probably wonder is what happened to DOGE's work? Well, according to federal officials, when DOGE was dissolved, the functions were redistributed mostly to the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, and to internal review teams inside other agencies. In other words, DOGE just didn't disappear, it just got absorbed by other entities. The audits are now part of a agency level oversight. The research passed to OPM and internal task teams. The recommendations are still being reviewed, but not under the DOGE name. It's a classic government move. Restructure the restructuring department. Then of course you have the public's reaction, and they can be broken down into three groups. The first group is that DOGE was just symbolic. These people argue that DOGE was never more than a political gesture, a PR-heavy attempt to show immediate reform during the start of an administration. The next group that you will hear from are those saying that DOGE could have worked better with structure. This group tends to believe the idea of a government efficiency department is valid, but DOGE was executed poorly. And then you have the third and final group, this group says that this proves that federal reform is just simply impossible. They are more pessimistic, have a more pessimistic view of this. The government inefficiency was too entrenched to fix internally. But across the board though, one major consensus did emerge between all three of these groups. DOGE's quiet death proves just how difficult it is to reform a system from within. So what does this mean going forward, now knowing all of this information? Because even without DOGE, the issues it was created to address still unfortunately exist. Federal bureaucracy is still slow. Agencies are still overlapping. IT systems are still outdated. Government hiring is still inconsistent and very complicated. And billions are still lost to inefficiency every year. But the collapse of DOGE teaches us something important. A department can't fix what the system itself does not want fixed. For future administrations that try to tackle government waste and redundancies, the lessons are very clear. You need enforcement power, you need bipartisan support, and you need a clear structure and chain of command. You need public transparency, and you need a long-term strategy, not a one-year sprint. Otherwise, even the biggest reform efforts will start to end quietly, much like DOGE did. So yes, the Department of Government Efficiency is done, but the issues it addressed are still very much alive. Whether you supported DOGE or doubted it from the beginning, the rise and fall of this department reveals something deeper about this government. It can be loud when starting something, but it will be very quiet when it ends something. And the disappearance of DOGE without warning and without public explanation and without closure will fuel political debates for years to come. Not just about Trump, but about how modern governments operate, how they communicate, and how they handle massive promises. The real question now isn't what happened to DOGE. It's who, if anyone, will try this again. If you found this information helpful, make sure y'all hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment down with your thoughts. Do you think Doge could have succeeded, or do you think it was doomed from the start? Me, I think it was doomed from the start. When I found out who was attached to it, I said, yeah, this isn't going to work. When I first heard about this, I was like, what in the world is a Doge? And that's another thing, I think, because a lot of people didn't know what it was, and it was kind of hard to explain for some people to grasp it. That's another thing. It was no transparency there. So yes, I'm of the mind that this was doomed from the start.